You know, and the legs, and you're going. I was very aware of the Edge, and I knew straight away, here's a guy who has come up with something totally different, you know. But I was also very aware of Robert Fripp, and he taught a lot from Robert Fripp, the whole delay thing, and with King Crimson. So there was a lot of that. So I was very aware of that. So it wasn't completely new to me. Yes, the way they were doing it as a essentially a three-piece King Crimson were much bigger, but Robert Fripp had touched on an awful lot of that delay things and getting it to play, using it as a rhythm and loop, almost like the early stages of looping, you know. And then I was aware of John Martin, the great acoustic. John Martin, all you have to do is go onto the Gold Coast test and see what he was doing. Amazing. So I was very aware of what you could do, and in fact I dabbled in it a bit myself. And I started to use the bow on the guitar, and then I started to do this whole thing where you were violining, what they call violining, using the violin part and using the trigger off the delay. So and then cutting it. So that used to be a big part of our show. So no, I was very aware of and tried to keep my ear to the ground and keep ahead of what people were doing. But I knew immediately when I heard the Edge play that it was totally unique sound. He had taken it a stage further from all those other guys as well. But John Martin and those guys, they were playing all around with those echoes and doing that very early. Phenomenal player. And Robert Fripp had been tinkering around a lot with that. So I guess maybe the Edge was being slightly, maybe that's where he was getting his influences, and thought I can take this a stage further, which he did. I mean, it's unmistakable, his sound. The minute you hear the guitar, you know it's them. And that to me is the mark of a really great guitar player. You had Rory. The minute Rory started, you knew it was Rory. You know, I don't care who it is, you just knew that sound. And that they had their own signature sound. And that's really that's the most difficult thing to do. You know, I don't ever think I went that far, but I haven't the essence of the sound is built. It's coming from them and their idea of the sound. And Rory's sound was that little treble booster he had on top of the back, but that was the sound, and no one could emulate that. Well, Brian May, very much influenced by that. He talks about it on YouTube quite a lot about how he went to Rory and asked him, and he got his sound from Rory Gallagher. You know, and very Rory explained what he was using and how he used it. So that was you know, again, that was the Irish influence coming through again. Not that many people would have associated Brian May with Rory Gallagher, but that's you know, Brian was very gracious when he said, you know, that's where his sound came from, and that was the whole idea of him building. He still to this day is using the Vox.
And his playing was incredible. You know, he's one of the very few people of that time who could make his guitar do anything, it seemed. It just seemed to be magic. I remember looking at this battered Stratocaster and thinking, how does that come out of there? You know, how does he do that?
Those Irish players at the time were very influential. You know, you had the whole Celtic thing with Eric Bell, you know, that intro to Whiskey in the Jar. There's nothing quite like it. You know, we go any place in the world, even to Europe to play now, which is still tour occasionally. It's always the first thing you hear, because then if we're playing there, it's an Irish band, an Irish name, we'd put on an Irish Whiskey in the Jar, and it's Eric's opening lines, you know. And again, you have to remember, also along that time, we had probably one of the finest guitar players of all time from Ireland, Henry McCullough. And Henry's CV reads like nobody else's CV in Ireland. I mean, to say that you played at Woodstock, the only Irish man to play Woodstock, and that's Henry was blazing a trail as well, and then went from there to Wings and McCartney. It doesn't get any. I mean, put that on your CV if you like, that'll get you anywhere. And it was, I very lucky to have met Henry and become very friendly with him in his latter years. Before sadly he passed, and I have nothing but admiration for what Henry did, because he was in a show band in Enniskillen, and my dad knew him well, because my dad was in show bands early on until he had the wee family band then, and we all started growing up. So they were called the Skyrockets. And Henry was, you know, in Enniskillen, and he was based out of Enniskillen. So they were all talking about this weird long-haired guy that was playing the electric guitar. My father come home, you know, I've never heard the like of it in my life. I don't know what to make of him, you know. He comes in and he gets a blanket wrapped around him, you know, it's the hippie, you know, and long hair down to there. He goes, you wouldn't know what it was coming in the door, but it was Henry, you know. And of course Henry went on to I think, supported Jimi Hendrix. So there again, they were blazing a trail very, very early on, you know. Incredible, these guys. You know, Henry was a big part of that whole scene as well. And I become very aware of that, of Henry through Eamon Carr of Horselips, because we actually sat down and Eamon educated me one night. I hadn't a clue who he was up until that point, and Eamon then told me the whole background and just what he had done. And then of course I went out and bought all Henry's own solo albums, which were absolutely fantastic. He had the Grease Band playing with him, for God's sake, you know. And there's rare footage of Henry playing in Germany at Rock Palace. Yeah, that's how big they were. So, you know, we must not forget Henry in all of this, a major player, you know. And you know, he actually told me, we were sitting one day, we were in the studio together, and I started to play the riff to Live and Let Die, and it was Henry who had come up with that, right, the very early, and he goes, how did you play it again? He had forgotten. So I'm there showing Henry McCullough the tune that he played. It was a funny moment. Yeah. It was really, but a marvellous player. You know, sadly overlooked because of the success of the other band. But, you know, there's no greater success than to be in one of the Beatles bands, you know, the Wings, and the only man to play Woodstock. I mean, what an incredible achievement. And that all came out of Ireland. It just boggles my mind at such an early stage in the way that Irish music, the rock music scene in Ireland was happening. You know, and Brush was a part of that as well, a major player in all of that. Without Brush you wouldn't have had Philip. So it all worked its way through that there. And then of course you had Eric with his show bands. He was in show bands too. And of course then, and I think that influence came through. You could hear, so, you know, that very Irishness coming through, and I think that's what appealed to the rest of the world. I mean, they used to say to us, you know, oh man, it sounds like, you know, Irish music, and we're going, no, it doesn't. You know, we're a rock band. You know, oh no, we can hear threads of it coming through, and years later I realised that, but I couldn't see it at the time. I just thought that's what we did. But the rest of the world could hear that thread coming through. So, you know, it was selling the music on and moving the music into the times as well. And then it also meant that people from other countries could relate to it. They did it in a very subtle way and a very clever way, like Lizzie did. I mean, all of Lizzie's melodies, when you hear the harmonies and stuff, that just, you know, they're trad melodies to me, in my mind. You know, you can sing every one of those melodies, and they're like trad tunes, you know. The harmonies, the boys are back in town. It's so like a traditional thing coming through. So for me, that's how I related to all of those bands, and that's how I think they moved all of that music along like that there. And Henry was a major player in that. So and his sound as well, you know. Henry had a great guitar sound, and if you listen to him at Woodstock, it's amazing when you hear, you know, with a little help from my friends, it's Henry doing the backing vocals and playing the guitar. And you know, he had met all the greats, Janis Joplin. I think she may have been his girlfriend for a little while. No more, I got you know, they were right up there with all the greats of the time. You know, right up there with and a lot of respect then started to come from the rest of the world when they seen with Van Morrison and seeing what people were doing, and for a little tiny island to produce so many great talents. And I remember a great quote from Van Morrison. He had a studio in America at the time, and he wasn't happy with the way the songs were turning out with the American musicians, and the record company weren't happy because they wanted the album finished. And he said, just give me a plane ticket home to Ireland and I'll have the musicians back that will be fit to do this. Just give me the plane ticket home and you'll have your album. And he was going to gather up all the Irish musicians that he knew and were involved and were well capable of playing. So I thought that was a wonderful thing to say to anybody, you know, that just give me a plane ticket home and I'll get the band back. That'll be as good as anything else in the rest of the world. And I think, you know, with the success then of U2, the Irish mentality was then to start believing in themselves. And I just think that was very, very important. There were so many great musicians in the show bands and all that just settled for that there, but had so much more to give, but just settled for that and didn't maybe believe in themselves enough to take it a stage further, you know, and that's all it needed. But those bands in particular, the Rats and all that, they totally, you could see the confidence in Bob Geldof. And I remember seeing them that day at Dalymount Park. It was, and the confidence in the Undertones, they really believed in what they were doing, and they sold it to the rest of the world. And there's never anywhere I go in Europe now, but they always mention those bands: the Undertones, Lizzie, the Boomtown Rats, U2 of course, you know, Gary Moore of course, you know. And then we tell them all about Henry playing, and not so many of them are aware of that, but Henry was a big player in all of that. Without him, that was another missing link, you know. And of course Eric, when he's synonymous with the riff, he's a legend, you know. Everywhere you go, you still hear that, and it still stands up today as one of the greatest rock riffs in my mind that's ever been written. You know, him and Johnny Feen, you know, the two between Jerry Doom and Whiskey in the Jar, they got it absolutely right.